Welcome to book club. This is our second book club, which is really fun. Biggest rule of book club, you didn't have to read the book to have a meaningful discussion. And so let's just get started. What initial takeaways did everyone have from this book?
So I think it's a really sharp contrast between his life and the way he lived and our discussion on gratitude that Dr. Edwards led. So.
It is a sharp contrast. This book is long. It's full of lots of really interesting material. I think Walter Isaacson is an incredible author and does a really good job at writing things exactly how they are, which is one of my favorite, points or parts of this book, is you really get a good insight, whether he liked it or not, into Steve Jobs' life. Yeah, absolutely. Any other initial takeaways?
So now that he's passed and we can look back and Apple's been what it is, it's easy to think about it as he did this amazing thing and glamorize that a little bit. And he did, and yet there were a lot of interesting aspects of his personality and the way he dealt with people. And I think one of the points that Walter Isaacson makes is the eccentric and unique things about his personality and way of being may have actually been the reason why he was able to do some of the things that he did. And he compares having a genetic disposition like sickle cell anemia preventing or making you immune to or resistant to malaria. It was a negative trait, but it had a positive benefit. And so to simply, and then he also points out that Steve Jobs would dichotomize people as being heroes or not. And so in reality, it's not that simple. People are a lot more complex than that. And they have good traits and bad traits, and traits that have positive things in one aspect or one scenario and are negative in another. And it sort of makes us all who we are in a way and have the capacity for really good and really not so good things depending on how our decisions. Anyway, I love the complexity of it, just how you read the book and you could categorize Steve Jobs one way or the other, and I think Steve Jobs said, or Walter Isaacson sort of discourages people from doing that because it's just way more complex than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think innovation takes a certain level of intensity, and I think we're lucky to have people that are willing to be kind of cuckoo sometimes. A kind of cuckoo at times to really push that innovation forward, and sometimes it doesn't always look like nice or PC or the easiest, kindest kind of guy ever. But I think it's really important to have people like Steve Jobs for that reason. So
I think I always think of the phrase, the power of yet. And I think you saw that when he first started out with computers and he started out with interest in that. And he's like, well, this isn't made yet, but it can be. And so I think that it's always a same thing like in our practices and stuff. We may not know how to do something yet, but it doesn't mean that we can't get there. And I think that he kind of had that moxie to do that, to go out and kind of go against the borders and figure out new problems that hadn't been created yet, and did a good job at it.
Yeah.
I love this book. I've driven my team crazy because I the sharing aspects of it. But one thing I really appreciate is that the Apple Store was built as a referendum of his products. Everything was the store, clean lines, the design. I mean, he read it over so thoroughly because he saw it as this is what defines what my product is. And I thought of that for our practice as we, when someone calls, how do we greet them? How do we welcome them? All of our systems, from our billing systems, everything, what does that say about what we provide? What is our product? And either it detracts from that or it supports that or strengthens that. We work really, really hard to be good at our craft, but if we have, harsh people on the phones or we're, sloppy in our systems, it really shows a lot about our product.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting to break down the product process start to finish. And Steve Jobs was he followed a product start to finish. He did not let a product go without him being there at the start or at the finish. And I think that had a lot of incredible benefits. Sometimes it also had some negative pieces because he couldn't let things go, right? Do you think that took away or could take away from a multidisciplinary approach if we have kind of that end-to-end finish with a product or a project or maybe a patient approach? Just in kind of thinking about how Steve Jobs had this vision for a product.
So I grew up with Steve. We worked together. I knew him well. I had several projects we teamed on together. I was an executive at Novell, and he was an executive first at Apple and then at Next. When I worked with Steve, I would think of him as a pioneer and visionary. You look at all the various firsts he did and he was responsible for. But I always thought of him more as demanding than as crazy. I don't think most who were around Steve would call him crazy. I mean, eccentric, but demanding, and he was a perfectionist. I see the same thing in a songwriter who looks at every word and every note and wants everything to be just perfect. But I would hope my surgeon thought that way, honestly, because I just had total knee, and I was really glad Dr. Pitts was precise and that there was no infection in the room and that everybody was checked twice and 3 times. He told me I was out, but and so I think that these stories are wonderful. It's been a long time since I read the book, but I just sort of lived in this industry and grew up in it. Worked with John Scully and worked with Steve and watched him hire the guy that ended up firing him, and because he was erratic. Now, Steve was hard for some to follow, because if you weren't as dedicated as he was, he didn't really want you around. But honestly, I don't know, John, do you think that way about people in the operating room? I mean, you want people around you in your team that are as dedicated as you are at doing their contribution. Anyway, I think of him with fond memories. He was hard. I remember one time I flew home to the Provo airport, and it was like 1 a.m. We had worked all day long, and I'm driving home and I get a call from Steve. And he's got this brand new idea, and I said, Steve, do you know it's 1 a.m.? He says, John, there's no time to sleep. We've got to get these things done. He pushed. He just was demanding, and I appreciated that about him. So for me, it was, I'm glad to be teaming up with a guy that really wants to win badly, and he will push. And every sports team I've been on, every good team like the team at Summit and other places here, the team at Dry Creek, I'm really thankful that we have similar people.
Yeah, that's awesome.
As a patient.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Just to build off that, I love more than anything opening an Apple product. You know, when you peel off, like you take it out of the box, it's just such an experience. And he was obsessed with the user experience. And every single step, I mean, every little tab you pull, there's just like this excitement. And I love that he had high expectations for his people and the product that he was delivering, because he did have this obsession with micromanaging maybe, but also he had really high standards, and he pushed everyone around him to have high standards as well. I think maybe if there's something that he lacked is a connection piece. You know, maybe he lacked connecting with his people. I mean, great leaders have high standards and high connection. So I don't know him well enough to say if he had high connection, but I definitely love that he had high standards and he held everyone accountable to those high standards.
Yeah. I mean, Ben, you kind of started talking about this too, about this user experience or maybe the patient experience, right? Or even the provider experience in all of our clinics. Is there anything that you're going to change or that you've been doing recently about your patient experience or client experience after reading this book? Anything that you're going to do different in your clinics to
For
change?
us?
Yeah, I mean anyone.
I seriously did go back and evaluate from beginning to end. What is it? And it really was we have a central scheduling team, and right now it's a very busy time. It's a lot of times when people call, they can't get a hold of someone. And I said that just doesn't work. We're in the business of connection. Our connection with our patients, our therapists with them matters the most. From the first call, if we don't answer the phone, that shows very poorly on us. And so we've had to pivot and turn that around and really identify how we can do that. So that's one area we did.
Oh, interesting.
I think, the other thing he did, I don't know how much he did this, but the iPod was so revolutionary. But the next product, the Shuffle, was really where they took up a whole lot of market share. And they saw how their users were using the iPod, and they saw a lot of them just like to shuffle their music. They didn't really care to have the screen, and so they thought, why don't we just make a real simple product to shuffle? And that's where I don't know the exact numbers, but they went from market share here to 74%. And I thought, how much are we listening to our patients? How much are we may think as a therapist, okay, they want this. How many times do we step back and go, maybe they don't. Maybe this matters to us, maybe that doesn't matter to them. So there's active processes in our practice where we're trying to do that.
That's cool. Anyone else changing? Yeah.
I appreciated the way that it didn't have to be done the way it had always been done for him. He was very opinionated, apparently, and spoke his mind about the current status of the products available, whether it was computers or music players or phones or Disney's products. He felt pretty strongly that they were not good enough, but that was the gold standard at the time. So he pushed the envelope of not just accepting what the standard was, but maybe we can do it better. And for him, it was one of my favorite lines at the very end. He said, I think it was from Henry Ford, said, if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, which is not what he ended up giving them, right?
Mm.
He developed the whole line of Ford. And Steve kind of showed that similar thought process of, we don't just have to stick with horses because that's what we know. We can do something a little bit better. We can do it differently.
Yeah. Steve blended art and technology and created something completely different than what anyone experienced. And sometimes I think about how we can blend medicine and patient experience or patient-focused care and create something different. I don't know what that looks like, but I think there's a lot of things out there. I think AI is coming in and helping us with that patient experience and medicine so that we can be focused better. I think robotics is changing that as well with technology, patient care, better outcomes with medicine. So I think you're right. Steve was kind of an incredible innovator and was able to blend two things that didn't always go together and make something really incredible. So, Chris?
So kind of to everyone's point, when you think about Apple and its products today, there is this seamless vision from, or the design and the art of the design. You see it, like you said, from the store all the way to opening the box. And that's an artist's vision. That's somebody who, I didn't read the book, don't really know anything about Steve Jobs other than his tribulations with liver transplantation. But you know, I mean, he clearly had the artistic vision for the entire process. And I think something that may be lacking in the patient experience right now is that we have all these great pieces like Summit Brain and Spine. We have the OR, we have the surgeons, the clinics, but then the patient experience after surgery in the hospital, on the floor, or in the recovery unit, and then getting to physical therapy after, like, I think that's the piece we might be lacking is this creative vision all the way through the process. We have great pieces, but not everything slickly integrates, like answering the phones, getting the correct information. I really think to succeed, we need to have something like a joint institute or a back institute where from the time they walk in, we've got patient education going and all the way until they're, until they're home and healed.
Yeah, I like that. It is interesting thinking about taking that end piece and tying it with the beginning piece, you know. Does the surgeon know the initial call that's happening into the clinic to get it scheduled, right?
I just had the experience of trying to get some email addresses for different surgeons and different office managers, and I was on hold sometimes 20 minutes and just hung up because nobody was answering the phone. I called like 5 different clinics yesterday, and the shortest amount of time I waited was like 12 minutes.
Yeah.
And the digital cul-de-sac of, well, if you want the registration, the billing,
Yeah, that's a runaround.
I was just thinking, like, boy, if I was somebody sick and worried about getting an answer from my provider or from the office,
I'd fax it. I'd fax it
it'd
in.
be pretty defeating.
Yeah.
I just keep thinking about how often do we step back and think about the patient experience and put ourselves in their shoes. What is it like for them to sit in our waiting rooms? What is it like for them to call our offices or show up for their appointments and be told they're running late, or hear that they need a particular treatment, and what do they really think about that? So when I look at what Steve did, and also other companies like Amazon that were able to just really win over their customers, I think they were completely focused on what the customer experience was like. And that may be a really important take home here is just always thinking about, because it's hard to do because we're just focused on our own. Yeah, I've got so many patients to see and I've got to do this and that. But what is the patient's experience like?
Yeah.
And trying to think about ways to improve that from the beginning to the end, all the way through.
Yeah, I like that. And it's really easy to hear feedback or hear, a patient say, I didn't have a great experience with this. And then, we're busy, we're trying our hardest, and we are really good at making excuses, I think. Like, oh, well, that happened this time because of maybe this. And then we move on and we don't think about it again. And I think it's really a better practice to say, why did it happen this time, though? Why did that patient have this experience, and how can we make sure that truly doesn't happen again? And if it was a one-off, why was it a one-off? Why did that experience happen with this patient? How do we make it right and also better for next time? I think it's easy to just let those kind of excuses roll in, and then something happens once and it happens again, then you create bigger issues. So, absolutely.
In our practice, I wrote this document. It's called the 10 out of 10 patient experience. And it's pretty much like a list of all the interactions that we have with the patients, all the little gifts along the way, all the exciting pieces, how we talk to the patient, how we greet the patient. And I'm creating these training videos on how to execute on these things, but I'm realizing there's a piece missing. And I don't know how long it's going to take me to create, but it's the provider experience, the employee experience. So I'm going to work on this document that's just pretty much like, how do we treat our employees? How do we greet each other? How do we talk to each other? How do we, onboard? How do we orient? How do we, create this excitement piece to, making us excited every day to treat patients?
Totally.
That's a huge aspect I'm going to work with as well.
Yeah, I think patients will recognize if our team culture is not there, or if it's a negative team culture, or if it's a fake team culture. And then where we work so closely together with all of the providers in a multi-specialty approach, if our provider culture is also not real or not genuine or isn't working, I think that the patients will experience that as well. And so our patient experience can't be good unless those are good, right? Without those two cultures actually being real and a good culture.
I always felt the way that Steve unified things was he was an amazing storyteller. And on stage, we always thought of him as the best in our industry at standing on stage and communicating to customers what the story was of the industry, of his product, of his company, all of it. He always had a story. And I think that stories help us unify things, because humans have a hard time keeping in their mind a list of things to do, but they can remember a story. And if the customer story or customer journey, we called them, was well documented and communicated to people, you could find other people who could tell that story and mimic the story. And that's the way he communicated through a broad, vast, big organization and to the world on stage. So I think he was an amazing storyteller.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It's also like how he inspired people, right? I mean, that story of where he went to the engineer and said, hey, I need 10 seconds off this boot time on the Mac. And the engineer said, no, you can't do that. And then he said, well, if man's life depended upon it, could you do it? He said, well, I could probably. And he was able to take that 10 seconds and extrapolate it on the number of Macs and how long it would take. And that would equate to, I don't know, 100 lives. I can't remember what he said. And that engineer went back and found 38 seconds to shave off.
It's crazy.
Take stories.
Yeah, that's cool. So, John, you talked about Steve's demanding leadership style. And I think that medicine is also a demanding work environment. It's a demanding industry. And how do you think we blend that demanding industry with our teams while still creating a really good work dynamic? Like, how do we demand excellence out of our teams by still having that good culture? How's that something that we blend?
I think Steve was like the ultimate disruptor. And I think that, so I work for Common Spirit, and I say it all the time, like the face of our company is our front desk person. And they're making probably the least amount in the office. And, I'm told like almost weekly, like health systems are not great at employing providers and having that under our umbrella. And that's just the status quo. And I'm like, well, why is that? It's okay to be a disruptor if they feel supported, if you are there for them, if you are getting them their needs met. But Steve was great at being a disruptor in moving things forward. And I think if we see stuff in our own company that, you're told it's just the status quo, it's the way that health systems work, that it's okay to be the disruptor when you have to be, knowing that you have to also be the person to move the solution forward. If there's a problem and you bring a problem to the table, you also have to come to the table with a solution. So that's kind of the dilemma that we have definitely in Common Spirit and health systems as a whole, is that it's a status quo, and it's okay to be a disruptor if you have a solution to the problem.
Yeah, I like that. I think good leaders, good innovators, people who are really inspiring, they ask a lot of you, but they would never ask you to do something that they wouldn't do themselves. They would.
Yeah, I love that.
They would ask that of themselves, so they're going to ask that of you. And I feel like those are the people that are easiest to follow, is if you feel that reciprocated work with them, which is really cool. That's a good point.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
One of the most memorable things of all of our meetings and conferences in my mind was when Mark Pope talked about getting curious instead of getting angry. or frustrated or mad at a situation when things didn't go very well. And you look at the front cover of this book, and this is a curious face, right? And I think that kind of encompasses the way that he faced status quo and being told that you couldn't do something. It was sort of this, well, maybe we can, and being curious about a unique, think differently about it. And I love that. I think that's a great way to tackle some of the problems that we have, is rather than getting angry or complaining or being frustrated or griping about it, think different and get curious.
That's cool. I like that. That's awesome.
Mark talked about culture, which a lot of teams talk about. They say, we've got a good culture. And what I usually have attributed that to, and Steve would do that too, is if you were on Steve's inside team that really was bought in like he was, he loved you and he treated you one way. If he felt you were adversarial to the success, he unfortunately sometimes was a little bit stark in the way he would treat you. But I think the way you asked how do you get that integrated, I think it's through getting people to understand the why we're doing things and what the cause is. He was very good about making things a cause. Get me 10 seconds is the cause. And you get buy-in from your team to say, this is our culture, this is what we do, and we do it in a particular way. And then people naturally want to do that because they understand why they're doing it, and they're as motivated as the leader is. I think that's one of the ways that you can integrate, is through just developing a certain kind of winning culture.
That's awesome. Well, this has been an awesome book club. I love book club. We're gonna do 4 more books next year, but the first book of the year for our first quarter.
Well, my dad referenced How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen in his Med Talk, which I still think was, again, powerful and one of the best messages that we've heard. So I read that book, and I think it has a lot of very good discussion points in it. And so I thought that would be a fun one to read for next time. It's not as long as this one, which is kind of nice, but it's thought-provoking and I think would be a good one.
Awesome. I'll send it out in our newsletter, in our weekly mailer. But thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful holiday. We won't see you for the next 2 weeks, and then we'll see you on the 7th for a discussion with Dr. Pitts. So thanks, everybody.